Riley Morrow was 11 years old, had cerebral palsy, and pushed open the emergency room doors at 9:47 p.m. with one shoe missing and a wrist that hung like something broken off a doll. Her other shoe was somewhere between the house and the sidewalk. She couldn't remember dropping it. She couldn't remember most of the walk, actually. Just the rain on her face and the way her wrist felt like it belonged to somebody else. Like if she looked at it too long, she might throw up. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The floor was that ugly speckled tile they put in hospitals because it hides the blood. Riley's one wet shoe squeaked against it as she limped toward the front desk, and the sound was so loud in her ears she almost turned around and left. Almost. The nurse behind the counter looked up, saw a small black girl, soaking wet, shaking, a bruise already blooming under her jaw, saw a wrist bent at an angle that made her stomach drop. "Sweetheart? Sweetheart, are you okay? Where's your—" Riley cut her off. Not with a scream, not with crying. With 6 words, whispered so quiet, the nurse had to lean forward to hear them. "Please, don't let him in. Here's the thing about emergency rooms at night. They're never empty. There's always someone with a cough that won't quit, someone holding a towel to a cut, someone slumped in a plastic chair waiting for news they don't want to hear." But when Riley Morrow walked through those doors, every single person in that waiting room looked up, not because she was loud, because she was the opposite. A child that quiet, that careful, that scared, that's a sound people recognize even when they don't want to. The nurse, her name tag said, Shonda came around the desk fast. She'd been doing this job for 19 years. She knew what a kid looked like after a bike accident. She knew what they looked like after a fight at school. And she knew what they looked like when the danger wasn't outside. When the danger lived in their own house and tucked them in at night. "Okay, baby. Okay, let's get you sat down. Can you tell me your name?" "Riley." "Riley, that's pretty. Can you tell me what happened to your arm?" Riley's eyes went to the door, then back to Shonda, then to the door again. "He said to tell you stairs." Shonda's jaw tightened. She didn't write that down. Not yet. "Who said that, sweetheart?" But before Riley could answer, the automatic doors slid open behind her, and every drop of color drained from that little girl's face. Clint Ralston walked into Cherry Road Memorial exactly 47 seconds after Riley did. He wasn't running, wasn't out of breath, wasn't doing any of the things you'd expect from a parent whose child had just wandered into an emergency room with a broken wrist. He was calm, steady. He even smiled at the security guard on his way in. "Evening. My stepdaughter, she's a little confused. Had an accident at home. She runs off sometimes. You know how kids are." The guard nodded. Clint moved past him toward the check-in desk. He was wearing a blue polo shirt, khaki pants, clean white sneakers, the kind of outfit a man wears when he wants to look like somebody you can trust. Like a coach, like a neighbor who helps you carry groceries, like somebody who would never, ever hurt a child. "Excuse me," his voice was louder now, "for the room. I'm looking for my daughter. She just came in. Riley Morrow? She's 11. Had a little fall at home." Riley heard his voice and went still. Not still like a kid waiting for something, still like a rabbit in a field when it hears a hawk. Shonda saw it, the way Riley's whole body locked up, the way her breathing went shallow, the way her good hand gripped the arm of the chair like she was trying to disappear into it. Clint kept talking. He said the same sentence 3 different ways. She fell off the couch. It was an accident. Kids get hurt. He said it to the nurse at the desk. He said it louder when a doctor passed by. He said it into his phone when he stepped into the corner, keeping his eyes on Riley through the glass partition. She fell off the couch. It was an accident. Kids get hurt. Over and over. Like if he said it enough times, it would become true. But here's what Clint didn't know. When Shonda had helped Riley into the exam room, she'd done what any good nurse does. She'd looked, really looked. And what she saw didn't match any couch in any living room anywhere. The bruise on Riley's rib cage had a thumbprint in it, clear as a signature. The wrist fracture was clean, a sharp, deliberate break, not the jagged mess you get when someone falls downstairs. Her t-shirt was damp with something that wasn't rain. When the doctor touched her left side, Riley flinched so hard, she almost fell off the table. Shonda had been doing this job for 19 years. She knew what a fall looked like, and she knew what a hit looked like. This was a hit. Multiple hits. Over time. So while Clint was out there rehearsing his script for anyone who would listen, Shonda was in the exam room with Riley, her voice soft, her hand gentle on Riley's shoulder. Riley, honey, I need you to tell me the truth, okay? Just between us. Just right here. Who hurt you? Riley's eyes filled up. Her bottom lip trembled. She looked at the door, the closed door, with Clint's shadow moving behind the frosted glass, and she said the words so quiet they barely made a sound. He hit me when he got mad. He says it's our secret. Shonda's hand tightened on Riley's shoulder. Not hard, just firm. The way you hold someone when you're promising not to let go. Okay, she said. Okay, baby. It's not a secret anymore. Now, this is the part where most stories tell you the system kicked in. That the hospital called the police came running, and everyone lived happily ever after. That's not what happened. Shonda flagged the doctor. The doctor made a call to CPS. CPS said they'd send someone within a window. They didn't say how big the window was. The hospital called the police. Police said they'd check it out when they had a unit available. Bureaucracy, paperwork, hold times, shift changes, and meanwhile, Clint Ralston was pacing the hallway, checking his watch, asking anyone with a badge when he could take his stepdaughter home. Men like Clint know how this works. They know the system moves slow. They know that a man with a clean record and a steady job and a house in a decent neighborhood gets the benefit of the doubt. They know that by the time anyone makes a real decision, they can be in the car, on the highway, gone. Riley knew it too. That's why she kept looking at the door. That's why she wouldn't let go of Shonda's hand. She'd told the truth. She'd done the hardest thing she'd ever done. And she wasn't sure it was going to matter. Mason Keegan wasn't supposed to be at Cherry Road Memorial that night. His nephew had caught a skateboard wheel wrong and opened up a gash on his forehead that needed 4 stitches. Easy fix, in and out. Mason was just there to keep the kid calm and drive him home after. But then he saw her. Not Riley, not at first. He saw Shonda, the way the nurse moved, quick, tense, the way she whispered something to a doctor in the hallway, and the doctor's face changed, the way everyone behind that desk suddenly looked like they were carrying something heavy. Mason had been around long enough to know what that looked like. He'd seen it in group homes, he'd seen it at shelters, he'd seen it at 2 a.m. in parking lots, when someone finally got brave enough to run. And then he saw Clint, the polo shirt, the rehearsed smile, the voice that was just a little too loud, a little too smooth, filling the room like he was running for office. She fell. Accident. Kids get hurt. Mason watched him for about 30 seconds. Watched the way his eyes kept tracking back to the pediatric wing. Watched the way his hand kept flexing and releasing, like he wanted to grab something. Then Mason looked through the window, and he saw Riley, small, soaked, hunched in a plastic chair, with her arm held against her chest, like it was something precious she was trying to protect, looking at the door, like it was a loaded gun. Mason had a daughter once. She'd be about Riley's age now, would have been. He didn't think about it. He just pulled out his phone and typed 7 words into the Iron Shepherds group text. Cherry Road, ER, child, possible abuse, need presence. He hit send, and then he leaned against the wall and waited. The first bike pulled into the parking lot 4 minutes later. The second one 6 minutes after that. By the time 12 minutes had passed, 20 men in leather cuts were walking through the automatic doors of Cherry Road Memorial. They didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't make a scene. They just arrived, one after another. Big men, most of them, beards, tattoos, boots that left wet prints on the tile, vests with patches that meant things most people didn't understand. They filled the waiting room, lined the hallway, stood near the pediatric wing entrance with their arms crossed and their eyes open. 20 of the scariest-looking men you've ever seen. And not one of them was the danger in that building. Now, we're about to go deep into this story. What those bikers did next, what Clint tried to do, what Riley finally said out loud for the first time in her life, It's the kind of story you don't forget. So if you're not already subscribed to Biker's Bite, now's the time. Hit subscribe, tap that bell, because what happens in this hospital room? You're going to want to see every second of it. Clint noticed them first. Hard not to. 1 second the lobby was half empty, the next it was wall to wall, denim and black leather. He stopped mid-sentence mid. It was an accident, and stared. What the hell is this? Mason pushed off the wall and walked toward him. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady. The way you walk when you've got nowhere else to be and all night to get there. This? Mason looked around at his brothers. Back at Clint. This is what happens when people pay attention. Clint's jaw tightened, his hand flexed again, but he didn't move, didn't say another word, because for the first time all night, someone was watching him, really watching, and he didn't know what to do about it. Riley saw them too. Through the window of the exam room, 20 men in vests, filling up the hallway like a wall. She didn't know who they were, didn't know why they were there, but she knew one thing. Clint couldn't move, couldn't get to her, couldn't pull his usual trick of smiling at the right people and making problems disappear. For the first time and longer than she could remember, Riley Morrow took a breath that didn't hurt. Children who survive learn things other children never have to. They learn which floorboards creak. They learn what a car engine sounds like when it's angry versus when it's just tired. They learn to read a room in half a second flat, the way the air changes, the way silence can mean safety or danger, depending on the time of day. Riley Morrow had learned all of it. She knew the exact brand of laundry soap they used at home, Gain, original scent. She knew because when Clint was in a good mood, the house smelled like clean clothes, and he'd let her watch TV after dinner. When he was in a bad mood, nothing smelled like anything except her own fear. She knew what time the back door slammed when Clint came home angry, usually 6:15, sometimes earlier if something went wrong at work. She'd learned to listen for the engine in the driveway, to count the seconds between the car door and the back door, to read his footsteps on the porch like a weather forecast. Heavy and fast meant, go to your room, close the door, don't make a sound. She knew the words he used before he hit. You're making me do this. He said it every time, like it was her fault, like she'd done something wrong just by existing, just by breathing, just by needing things that cost money and took up space. You're making me do this, Riley. And then his hand, or his belt, or whatever was closest. Children who survive memorize everything. Not because they want to, because they have to. Because knowing the patterns is how you stay alive. Riley had been staying alive for 2 years. The doctor's name was Patterson, young guy, maybe 32, 33. He had kind eyes and a soft voice, and he looked like he hadn't slept in about 16 hours. When he came into the exam room, with Riley's x-rays pulled up on his tablet, his face told the whole story before he said a word. The wrist fracture was displaced. That meant surgery. That meant pins and plates and weeks in a cast and physical therapy after. That meant this wasn't something that happened from falling off a couch. 3 cracked ribs, 2 on the left side, 1 on the right, different stages of healing, which meant different incidents, different nights, different times. Clint had decided Riley was making him do this. And the bruises, God, the bruises, hidden under her clothes like secrets, yellow ones fading on her back, purple ones blooming on her sides. A perfect handprint on her upper arm where someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. Dr. Patterson looked at the scans, looked at Riley, looked at Shonda, who was standing by the door with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. Then he pulled up Riley's file on the hospital system, and that's when his face changed. See, here's the thing nobody talks about, the thing that makes you want to put your fist through a wall. Riley had been to Cherry Road Memorial before, twice in 18 months. First time, she was 9. Came in with a broken finger. The paperwork said she'd slammed it in a door. Second time, she was 10. Came in with bruised ribs. The paperwork said she'd fallen off her bike. Both times, the same man had brought her in. Both times, he'd had the same calm voice, the same reasonable story, the same clean polo shirt and concerned parent act. Both times, Riley had been too scared to say anything different. Both times, she'd gone home with him. Dr. Patterson stared at that file for a long time. Then he looked at Riley, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you're asking a question you don't want to hear the answer to. Riley, I need you to tell me the truth, okay? Not what anyone told you to say, the truth. Who did this to you? Riley's whole body went tight. Her eyes shot to the door, to the window, to Shonda, back to the doctor. I can't. You can, sweetheart. You're safe here. I promise. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. He said, if I told, he'd make sure nobody wanted me. He said Mom would pick him. He said I'd end up alone, and it would be my fault. Dr. Patterson didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just waited. And then Riley said the name out loud for the first time in 2 years. Clint, he hit me and said I'd learn to keep quiet. He said it was our secret. He said, her voice broke completely. He said if I was good, he'd stop. But I keep being bad. I keep making him do it. Shonda made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Like something inside her had cracked. Dr. Patterson knelt down, so he was at Riley's eye level. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Riley, listen to me. You didn't make anyone do anything. What's happening to you is not your fault. It was never your fault. And we're going to make sure it never happens again. Okay? Riley nodded. But her eyes were still on the door, because she knew something the doctor didn't. She knew that people had said things like that before. Teachers, neighbors, her mom's sister, once, at Thanksgiving, and nothing had ever changed. Out in the hallway, Clint Ralston was putting on the performance of his life. He'd been doing this long enough to know how it worked. You stay calm, you stay polite, you make eye contact, you refer to the child as my daughter, even though she's not. You wear the wedding ring where everyone can see it. You speak to authority figures with just the right mix of concern and deference. Worried father, cooperative citizen, nothing to hide. I just want to make sure she's okay. She gets confused sometimes. The cerebral palsy, it affects her coordination. She's always falling. We've talked to her doctor about it. The nurse at the desk nodded along. Why wouldn't she? He seemed so reasonable, so normal, so much like everyone else in that waiting room. But the bikers were watching. Mason had positioned himself against the wall, about 15 feet from where Clint was standing, close enough to hear, far enough not to seem threatening. His arms were crossed, his face was blank, and his eyes hadn't left Clint since the man walked in the door. Rex Navarro, the one they called Badge, the ex-cop, with 20 years on the force, was by the vending machines, pretending to decide between a Snickers and a bag of chips. He wasn't hungry. He was listening. And what they heard told them everything. Clint stepped away from the desk and pulled out his phone, walked toward the window, lowered his voice just enough that he thought nobody could hear. They're making a big deal out of nothing. You know how hospitals are. Tell her it was the stairs, okay? Make sure she remembers it was the stairs. He was talking to someone. Riley's mother, probably. Coaching his story, making sure the details matched. Just keep trying her phone. I don't care if she's not answering. Leave a message. Tell her Riley had an accident and everything's fine. I've got it handled. He hung up, turned around, caught Mason looking at him. For just a second, half a second, really something flickered in Clint's eyes. Something cold. Something that didn't match the concerned father mask he was wearing. Then it was gone, and he was back to his performance. But Mason had seen it. That flash of something ugly underneath. The real Clint. The one Riley knew. Here's what people don't understand about men like Clint Ralston. They're not nervous. That's the whole problem. They've done this before. They know exactly how long the system takes to move. They know that CPS is underfunded and overworked. They know that police are juggling a dozen calls at once. They know that a guy with a clean record and a steady job gets the benefit of the doubt 9 times out of 10. Clint wasn't pacing because he was worried. He was pacing because he was waiting, running out the clock, counting the minutes until someone with a badge told him he could take Riley home. And the system? The system was doing exactly what Clint expected. The hospital had called CPS 45 minutes ago. CPS said they'd dispatch someone within a time window. They didn't say how big the window was. The hospital had called the police 30 minutes ago. Police said they'd send a unit when one was available. They didn't say how long that would be. Meanwhile, Clint was at the nurse's station again, third time in 20 minutes. His voice was patient, but there was an edge to it now. The mask was slipping. I understand you're doing your job. I appreciate that. I really do. But she's my daughter, and she's scared, and I think it would be better for everyone if I could just take her home and let her rest. We can answer any questions tomorrow. I'll bring her back first thing. The nurse hesitated, looked at her computer, looked at Clint, and for one horrible second, it looked like she was going to say yes. This is what most people don't get. Monsters don't hide in shadows. Not the smart ones. The smart ones hide in paperwork. In he seems like a nice guy. In, let's not jump to conclusions. In, we need to follow procedure. They hide in the gap between something terrible happening and something actually being done about it. Clint Ralston knew that gap like he knew the back of his own hand. He'd been living in it for 2 years. He had a job manager at an auto parts store on the south side. Good job, steady paycheck. The kind of job that makes people think you've got your life together. He had a house, nothing fancy, but it was in a decent school district. The kind of house where neighbors wave when they're getting their mail. The kind of house that doesn't look like anything bad could happen inside it. He had a wife, Riley's mother, Diane, who wasn't answering her phone because she was at her sister's place with a dead battery and no idea what was happening. And he had a story, the same story he'd told twice before, the same story he'd tell again if he had to. Falls, accidents, a clumsy kid with coordination problems. Nothing to see here. What did Riley have? A broken wrist, 3 cracked ribs, a whisper that only one nurse had heard, and a plastic horse charm hidden in the pocket of her wet jeans. The horse was small, faded purple. One of the legs was cracked off. Riley had found it in a cereal box 3 years ago, back when her mom was still single and they lived in an apartment that smelled like microwave popcorn and safety. She kept it because it reminded her of before Clint, before everything changed. Clint had found it once, told her it was junk, threw it in the trash. She'd fished it out at 3 in the morning while he was asleep, hid it better after that. When he'd grabbed her tonight, when he'd twisted her arm and thrown her against the wall and told her she was making him do this again, Riley had made sure to grab the horse before she ran, left her shoe behind, left her jacket, left everything else. But she kept the horse. Ivy Mercer noticed it first. Ivy was the one they called Doc, ex-combat medic, small woman with steady hands and a voice that could calm a hurricane. She'd been sitting with Riley for the past hour, not asking questions, just being there, being solid. Riley had been turning the horse over and over in her palm, a nervous habit, a way to feel something that wasn't fear. "That's pretty," Ivy said. "What's its name?" Riley looked up, surprised that anyone had noticed, surprised that anyone cared. "Violet. That's a good name. You have it a long time?" "Before," Riley's voice was quiet. "Before he came." Ivy nodded, didn't push, just waited. And then Riley said something that made Ivy's chest hurt so bad she had to look away. "He keeps my toys, Clint. He says if I'm bad, he'll take one. If I tell, he'll take them all. He already took my books, and my stuffed dog, and my stopped, swallowed. Violet's the only one left. He doesn't know I have her." Ivy's hands were shaking. She made them stop. "Riley, can I tell you something?" Riley nodded. "You see all those men out in the hallway? The ones in the vests?" Riley's eyes went to the window, the wall of leather, the boots, the crossed arms. She'd been watching them for the past hour, wondering, they're my family, and now they're yours too. You understand what I'm saying? Riley shook her head. She didn't understand. She'd stopped understanding family a long time ago. "It means that man out there, Clint, he's not taking you anywhere. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever." Ivy's voice was steady as stone. "It means you keep Violet. You keep everything. And nobody is going to make you feel like you have to earn the right to be safe." Riley stared at her, and something in that little girl's face cracked open. Not the fear. The fear was still there. Probably always would be, at least a little. But something else came up underneath it. Something that had been buried so deep, Riley had forgotten it existed. Hope. Mason came into the room a few minutes later. He moved slow, careful, the way you move around an animal that's been hurt. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at Riley, then at Ivy, then back at Riley. Then he knelt down, so he was at her level. His knees cracked when he did it. Old injury from a bike accident 15 years ago. He didn't care. Riley, my name's Mason. My friends call me Hardline. You can call me whatever you want. Riley didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. I'm gonna tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Really hear it. Okay? Riley nodded. That man out there, the one who hurt you, he's not going to touch you again. He's not going to take you out of this hospital. He's not going to go home with you. You know how I know? Riley shook her head. Mason pointed toward the hallway, toward the 20 men in leather who had showed up without being asked, who had stayed without being paid, who had made themselves into a wall between an 11-year-old girl and the monster who'd been hurting her. Because we're not leaving. Not until you're safe. Not until that man is gone. Not if it takes all night. Not if it takes a week. His voice dropped lower, softer. The voice of a man who'd made promises before and kept every single one. You're not alone anymore, Riley. I know you've been alone for a long time. I know you've been scared. I know you've been keeping secrets because you thought you had to. But that's done now. You hear me? That's done. Riley's chin trembled. Her eyes filled up. She clutched Violet so hard the cracked leg dug into her palm. What if he... Her voice broke. What if he gets me anyway? Mason shook his head. Slow, certain. He won't. But what if... He won't. Mason's voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath it. I promise you, Riley. On my life. That man is not going to hurt you ever again. Riley looked at him. At Ivy. At the hallway full of strangers who had shown up for her, who had stayed for her, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself believe it might be true. Now, we're about to go deep into this story, what those bikers did next, what Clint tried to do, what Riley finally found the courage to say out loud. It's the kind of story that stays with you. So if you're not already subscribed to Biker's Bite, now's the time. Hit subscribe, tap that bell. Because what happens in this hospital room, you're going to want to see every second of it. Most people think bikers handle problems with fists, with chains, with the kind of violence you see in movies where everybody's got a knife and nobody's got a plan. That's not how the Iron Shepherds worked. Mason had been running this crew for 11 years. He'd learned something in that time, something most people never figure out. The scariest thing in the world isn't a man who throws punches. It's a man who doesn't have to. Violence is loud. It's messy. It gives lawyers something to work with and judges something to frown at. It turns victims into defendants and lets the real monsters walk away, looking like the injured party. But witnesses, documentation, pressure that comes from 20 people who won't leave and won't look away, that's the kind of power that doesn't leave bruises. And it's the kind of power men like Clint Ralston have no idea how to fight. Mason gathered his core people in the hallway outside the vending machines, close enough to keep eyes on Riley's room, far enough that Clint couldn't hear them talking. All right, here's where we're at. His voice was low, calm, the same voice he used when the stakes were highest. Hospital called CPS an hour ago. CPS gave them some window that could mean 20 minutes or 4 hours. Police got a call too, but they're not prioritizing. That means we've got a gap. And that man, he nodded toward Clint, who was pacing by the nurse's station again. He knows it. He's waiting us out. Rex Navarro Badge was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. 53 years old, retired from the force after 2 decades, and he still had the look, the one that made people straighten up without knowing why. I called Danny, my old partner. He's on shift tonight. Said he'd flag the call, make sure it doesn't get buried under whatever else they've got going. Rex pulled out his phone, checked something, put it back. But that's not enough. We need paper, real paper, the kind that triggers an emergency hold. Meaning what? That was Tommy Ruiz. Short stack. Youngest guy in the crew, showed up because someone texted him, still wasn't sure why he'd stayed. His arms had been crossed since he walked in. Skeptical, watching. Meaning documentation. Rex looked at Ivy. Doc, you've been in there with her. What do we have? Ivy Mercer was small. 5'2", maybe 115 pounds. The kind of woman people underestimated, right up until they needed someone to stay calm while everything fell apart. She'd done 2 tours as a combat medic before she'd come home and found a different kind of war to fight. I've got notes. Everything she said, time-stamped. The words he uses before he hits her. The schedule she's memorized. The previous hospital visits. Ivy's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Something that wanted to break things. The kid's been building a case without knowing it. She's got details no 11-year-old should have to remember. Mason nodded. That's good. That's real good. What about medical? Dr. Patterson's on our side. He pulled her old files. 2 prior visits, both documented as accidents, both with the same guardian signature. He's writing up a formal assessment right now. Displaced wrist fracture, 3 cracked ribs, bruising in multiple stages of healing. Ivy paused. He said the x-rays alone would be enough. But the pattern? The repeat visits? That's what's going to nail it. So we've got documentation. Mason looked around at his people. What else do we need? Rex held up his phone again. I'm working on getting someone from CPS to actually show up. Not just take a number. Show up. I've got a contact in family services who owes me from way back. She's making calls. Good. Mason turned to the rest of the group. The ones filling the hallway. The ones who'd shown up in the rain because 7 words on a group text told them a kid needed help. Here's what I need from everyone else. You don't move. You don't engage. You don't give that man anything he can use against us. You just stand there. You watch. You make sure every single person in this building knows that if something happens to that little girl, there are 20 witnesses who saw everything. Shortstack shifted his weight. That's it? We just stand here? That's it. Mason's voice didn't waver. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to leave. Men like him count on people getting tired, getting bored, moving on to the next thing. We're not doing that. We're staying until this is done. And if he tries something? Shortstack looked toward Clint. The man was on his phone again, his back to them, his voice too low to hear. What then? Mason didn't answer right away. He watched Clint for a long moment. The way he kept checking the exits. The way his eyes kept moving to Riley's door. The way his whole body was coiled like something waiting to spring. If he tries something, Mason said finally, then we stop him. But we don't start it. We don't give him the excuse. We let him make the mistake. And when he does, we're ready. 20 minutes later, Mason made a phone call of his own. He stepped outside, just past the automatic doors, where the rain had slowed to a mist and the parking lot lights made everything look yellow and tired. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in about 8 months. Carla, it's Mason. The woman on the other end laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the laugh of someone who knew exactly why he was calling. Hardline. I was wondering when you'd cash in that favor. Tonight, Cherry Road Memorial, Pediatric Wing. I need you to make a call. What kind of call? The kind where you tell your editor there might be a story about a hospital that let an abused kid walk out the door with her abuser because nobody wanted to do the paperwork. Silence on the other end. Then, that's a hell of a lead. It's not a lead yet. That's the point. I'm trying to make sure it never becomes one. But if this guy walks out of here with that kid, I want every camera in the city pointed at this building by morning. You're playing hardball. I'm protecting a child. The hardball is optional, depending on whether anyone does their job. Another pause. Then Carla's voice, different now. Serious. Give me the details. I'll make some calls. But Mason, if this goes sideways, I'm running the story either way. I'm counting on it. Back inside, the bikers had settled into position. It wasn't choreographed, nothing about it was rehearsed, but they'd done this before. Enough times that everyone knew where to stand, where to watch, how to fill a space without looking like they were filling it. 2 guys by the main entrance, not blocking it, just present. Another 3 near the elevators. 4 more spread along the hallway that led to the pediatric wing. The rest scattered through the waiting room, some sitting, some standing, all of them with their eyes open and their mouths closed. 20 men in leather, not making a sound, not making a threat, just refusing to leave. Clint noticed. Of course, he noticed. He'd been watching them all night, trying to figure out what they wanted, trying to find the angle. Men like Clint always looked for the angle, the leverage, the thing they could use to make a situation go their way. But there wasn't one. That was the thing. The bikers weren't asking for anything, weren't demanding anything, weren't doing anything that could be called illegal or even impolite. They were just there, watching, waiting. And it was driving Clint crazy. In Riley's room, Ivy sat in the plastic chair by the bed. She hadn't moved in 2 hours, except to get Riley a cup of water and help her adjust the pillow under her arm. Riley was tired, the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep, but she wouldn't close her eyes. Every few minutes, they'd drift toward the door, check the window, make sure nothing had changed. You should rest, Ivy said. Nobody's coming in here that isn't supposed to. I can't. Riley's voice was small, hoarse from crying earlier. What if I fall asleep and he won't? Ivy leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but there was steel in it. You see that man out there? Big guy? Scar on his jaw? Looks like he could bench press a truck? Riley nodded. She'd been watching Mason all night. He's not leaving this hospital until you do. And neither am I. And neither are any of those guys in the hallway. You understand? Riley looked down at her lap. At Violet, the little purple horse, still clutched in her good hand. Why? Why what? Why are you helping me? Riley's eyes came up, confused, almost suspicious. I'm not your kid. I'm not. I'm nobody. Why do you care? Ivy was quiet for a moment. She'd been asked this question before, by other kids, other mothers, other people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten that sometimes help just shows up. You know how some people look at a kid in trouble and think, someone should do something? Riley nodded. We're the someone. Ivy reached out and touched Riley's hand. Gentle, careful. That's all there is to it. You needed help. We showed up. That's what we do. Riley stared at her, and for just a second, her face did something it hadn't done all night. It relaxed. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough to show that somewhere underneath all that fear, there was still an 11-year-old girl who wanted to believe that good things could happen. Okay, Riley whispered. Okay. Ivy squeezed her hand. Now try to rest. I'm not going anywhere. At 11:47 p.m., Clint made his move. He'd been working up to it for the last half hour, pacing, checking his phone, talking to nurses in that too loud voice, asking about discharge papers, about when he could take his daughter home, about whether there was a back entrance, because the parking situation out front was terrible. Nobody bought it, but nobody stopped him either. He waited until the shift change. That 10-minute window when the night nurses were coming on and the evening nurses were giving reports, and nobody was paying quite as much attention as they should have been. Then he walked toward Riley's room. Not fast, not suspicious, just a concerned stepfather going to check on his kid. Nothing wrong with that. He pushed open the door, saw Riley in the bed, saw Ivy in the chair, smiled that practice smile. Hey, sweetheart, how you feeling? Riley went rigid. Her whole body locked up like someone had flipped a switch. We're going to head home, okay? Doctor said you're all set. Just need to sign some papers. That was a lie. Dr. Patterson hadn't said anything of the sort. But Clint knew that Riley was too scared to contradict him. He was counting on it. I don't. Riley's voice was barely a whisper. I don't want to go. I know you're tired, baby. That's why we need to get you home. Get you in your own bed. He reached for her hand. Come on, let's go. Ivy stood up, smooth, calm, putting herself between Clint and the bed without making it look like a confrontation. Actually, I think we're still waiting on the doctor. Maybe we should double-check before anyone goes anywhere. Clint's smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. I'm sorry, who are you? Friend of the family. I don't know you. That's okay. Ivy's voice was pleasant, almost cheerful. We're still waiting on the doctor. Clint's jaw tightened. For a second, just a second, that mask slipped, and Ivy saw what was underneath, the anger, the calculation, the thing that made an 11-year-old girl memorize the sound of footsteps. Then the mask was back, and Clint reached past Ivy, grabbed Riley's wrist, the good one, and pulled. "Come on, Riley." "Now." Riley gasped, tried to pull away, couldn't. Ivy moved. She didn't grab Clint, didn't touch him. She just stepped closer, angled her body between him and the door, and spoke loud enough to carry into the hallway. "Sir, I really think we should wait for the doctor." Mason heard it, the change in Ivy's voice, the pitch that said something's wrong without saying the words. He was moving before he consciously decided to. The hallway was long, maybe 50 feet from where he'd been, standing to Riley's door. He covered it in about 4 seconds. By the time he got there, Clint had Riley out of the bed and was pulling her toward the exit. His grip on her wrist was tight, too tight. She was wincing with every step. "I need to get through." Clint's voice was louder now, losing the polish. "She's my daughter, and I'm taking her home." Ivy was walking beside them, not stopping him, just staying close, asking questions. "Does she have her discharge papers? Did the doctor sign off? I just want to make sure everything's in order." Clint ignored her, kept walking, pulled Riley through the door and into the corridor, and stopped. 20 men in leather vests, standing shoulder to shoulder, filling the hallway from wall to wall, not moving, not speaking, not threatening, just looking at him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped. Riley's wet shoe squeaked against the tile, and Clint Ralston, for the first time all night, looked scared. Mason stepped forward. Just one step, enough to put himself directly in Clint's path. "Where you headed?" "Excuse me." Clint's voice was climbing. Losing control. "I need to get through. She's my daughter." "Stepdaughter." Mason's voice was low, even. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud because everyone's already listening, and she's not going anywhere. "You can't," Clint sputtered. "You can't keep me from my own family. This is kidnapping. I'll call the police." Rex Navarro stepped forward, held up his phone, smiled a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "Already did. They're on their way. Want to wait together?" Clint's face went pale, then red, then something worse. "Get out of my way." His voice was different now. The mask was gone. The real Clint was showing through. "All of you. Get out of my way, or I swear to God." "Sir." A nurse, Shonda, the one who'd been with Riley from the start, stepped forward. Her voice was firm, professional. "You cannot remove a patient without authorization. I'm going to have to ask you to step back. She's my daughter. She's a patient. And she's not going anywhere until the doctor clears her." Clint's hand tightened on Riley's wrist. She cried out a small sound, barely audible, but everyone heard it. And something in the hallway changed. The bikers shifted. Not much, just enough, like water finding a crack in a dam. Suddenly the space felt smaller, the air felt thicker. 20 pairs of eyes locked on Clint Ralston like crosshairs finding a target. "Let go of her arm." Mason's voice hadn't changed, still low, still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that said, "This is your last chance." "Or what?" Clint laughed, a desperate sound. "You'll beat me up? In front of all these witnesses? Go ahead. I'll own this hospital by the time my lawyer's done." "Nobody's gonna beat you up." Mason took another step forward. They were less than 3 feet apart now. "But here's what's going to happen. You're going to let go of that little girl's arm. You're going to step back, and you're going to wait right here until the police arrive. That's door number 1. And door number 2? Mason smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Door number 2 is you keep your hand on her. And these nice security cameras," he pointed up. Clint's eyes followed. A camera mounted in the corner, red light blinking, "are going to watch 20 men forget their manners. Your call." Clint's face twisted. His hand trembled on Riley's wrist. And then he made his decision. He yanked Riley hard, tried to push past Mason, tried to break through the line. 2 sets of hands caught him, stopped him cold, not hitting, not hurting, just holding him in place, like he was made of air. Riley stumbled free. Ivy was there, caught her, pulled her back, away from Clint, away from those hands that had hurt her so many times before. Clint struggled, swore, screamed about lawyers and lawsuits. and how they were all going to prison. Nobody let go. And then, the sound of boots on tile, 2 patrol officers coming through the main entrance, walking into a corridor filled with leather vests, and one man being held by strangers while a little girl cried in the corner. The next few minutes went fast. Officers talked to the nurses, talked to Dr. Patterson, looked at Riley's medical records, looked at her wrist, looked at the bruises, looked at Clint. One of the officers, the younger one, walked over to Mason. "You want to tell me what happened here?" Man tried to remove a child from the hospital against medical advice. Child has documented injuries consistent with abuse. We stopped him from leaving. That's it. You didn't touch him? We held him, to prevent him from taking her. Mason's voice was steady. Everything's on camera. Check the footage. The officer looked at Clint, at Riley, at the 20 men who'd shown up in the middle of the night to protect a kid they'd never met. Then he walked over to his partner and said something low. A minute later, Clint Ralston was in handcuffs. Not for assault. Not yet. That would come later, after the forensic interview, after Riley's statement, after 18 months of documented accidents got pulled into the light. For now, it was interference with a minor in protective custody, attempting to remove a patient against medical orders, enough to hold him, enough to keep him away from Riley until the rest could be sorted out. He was still screaming when they walked him out, still promising lawsuits, still insisting it was all a mistake. Nobody was listening. Riley watched them take him away. Her whole body was shaking. The hand Ivy was holding trembled like a leaf in a storm, but she didn't look away. She watched until the automatic doors closed behind him, and he was gone. Then she looked at Mason. "Is it over?" Mason knelt down. His knees cracked again. He didn't care. The hard part is, his voice was gentle, the same voice he'd use with his own daughter if she'd lived. "The rest? We're gonna figure out together." "What rest?" "The part where you get better. The part where you go somewhere safe. The part where you learn that not everybody in the world is like him." Mason reached out and touched her shoulder. "Careful. Light. That part takes longer, but you're not doing it alone, okay?" Riley looked at him, at Ivy, at the 20 men in leather who'd stayed all night for a kid they didn't know, and she nodded. "Okay. Before we go any further, hit that like button if you're rooting for Riley. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your engagement helps us find more families like this one, and prove to more kids like Riley that someone will always show up." Riley slept that night, really slept. For the first time in months, maybe years, she closed her eyes without listening for footsteps. Ivy stayed until midnight, sat in that plastic hospital chair with her boots up on the radiator and her eyes on the door. Not because anyone was coming, because Riley needed to know someone was watching, someone who wasn't waiting to hurt her. At midnight, Bear took over. Big guy, 6'4", hands like dinner plates. He didn't say much, just nodded at Ivy, settled into the chair, and pulled out a paperback Western he'd been working through for about 3 months. At 4 in the morning, Shortstack showed up with coffee and a breakfast burrito he'd grabbed from the all-night place on 5th. He wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody had asked him, but he'd been thinking about Riley all night, that little girl with the broken wrist and the look in her eyes, like she'd already lived 100 years and he couldn't sleep. So he came back. That's how it went. All night, into the morning. One biker leaving, another one arriving. A rotation nobody organized, but everybody understood. Someone was always there. They found Diane Riley's mother around 7 in the morning. She'd been at her sister's place in Riverside, phone dead, no idea what had happened. When the police told her, she collapsed. Right there in her sister's kitchen, fell against the counter and slid down to the floor and made a sound that didn't have words in it. Some people asked later why she didn't know, how she could live in the same house and not see what was happening to her daughter, how she could marry a man like Clint and not notice what he was. But that's the wrong question. The real question is, why do men like Clint choose women who are already drowning? Diane had been on her own since Riley was 3, working 2 jobs, barely keeping the lights on, exhausted down to her bones every single day. And then Clint showed up with his steady paycheck, and his nice smile, and his way of making everything feel just a little bit easier. She wanted to believe, she needed to believe, so she did. The bikers didn't judge her. Not yet. That wasn't their job. Their job was making sure Riley was safe. Everything else could wait. The surgery happened the next morning. Dr. Patterson put 2 pins in Riley's wrist and told her she'd be in a cast for 8 weeks. When she woke up from the anesthesia, groggy and confused, the first thing she saw was Ivy sitting beside her bed. "Hey, little one. How you feeling?" Riley blinked, looked around, looked at the door. "He's not here," Ivy said. "He's not coming. You're safe." Riley's eyes filled up, but she didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. Instead, she just reached out with her good hand and held onto Ivy's fingers like they were the only solid thing in the world. The next few days blurred together. Doctors and nurses and social workers and police officers asking questions Riley had been too scared to answer for 2 years. She answered them now, slowly, carefully, one word at a time, and people believed her. That was the part that kept surprising her. She'd tell them something about the laundry soap, about the back door slamming, about the words Clint used before he hit, and they'd write it down. They'd nod. They'd look at her like what she said mattered. Nobody told her she was lying. Nobody told her she was making a big deal out of nothing. Nobody told her to be quiet. For the first time in her life, Riley Morrow was heard. They brought her real food. Not the scraps Clint decided she deserved. Real food. Pancakes from the cafeteria. A cheeseburger short stack snuck in from the McDonald's down the street. A slice of chocolate cake one of the nurses brought from her kid's birthday party. Riley ate like she'd forgotten what full felt like, because she had. They let her sleep. Real sleep. Not the half-awake terror of listening for footsteps, waiting for the door to open, waiting for the shadow that meant pain was coming. She slept 10 hours that first night, 12 the second, woke up disoriented each time, looking for the danger, and finding only Ivy or Bear or one of the other bikers sitting quietly in the corner. They gave her something she hadn't had in years. Peace. 6 weeks later, Riley was a different kid. Not completely different. The fear was still there, tucked in the corners. She still flinched at loud noises. Still checked the door more than she needed to. Still slept with Violet under her pillow, just in case. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open. She made eye contact now. Not always, not with everyone, but sometimes. She'd look right at you when she talked, and you could see the person she was starting to become underneath all the damage. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind that surprised her when it came out, like she'd forgotten her own voice could make that sound. The first time it happened, she was sitting at the kitchen table in her aunt's house, listening to Shortstack tell a story about the time he'd tried to fix a motorcycle and ended up covered in oil from head to toe. She laughed so hard she snorted, and then she looked embarrassed, and then everyone else started laughing too. She told people when something hurt. That was new. Before, she'd learned to hide it, to push through, to pretend everything was fine because saying it wasn't fine meant punishment. But now, when her wrist ached, or her ribs throbbed, or she just felt sad for no reason she could name, she said so. And people listened. She said no when she meant no. That was the biggest one. A tiny word, 2 letters. But for Riley, it was everything. Mason showed up every Thursday, at 4 o'clock. Same time, same place. He'd knock on the door of her aunt's house, and Riley would let him in, and they'd sit at the kitchen table together while he taught her to tie knots on a model sailboat. It was silly. A grown man with tattoos up both arms, and a Harley parked in the driveway, sitting across from an 11-year-old girl, arguing about whether a bowline or a clove hitch was better for securing a mainsail. But that was the point. Silly things are safe things, and Riley hadn't had many of those. "You're doing it wrong," she told him one afternoon, watching him fumble with a piece of rigging. "The loop goes the other way. I've been tying knots since before you were born. Then you've been doing it wrong since before I was born." Mason looked at her. At this kid, who'd barely spoken above a whisper 6 weeks ago. At this kid, who was now giving him grief about his knot-tying skills. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep. Fine, he said. Show me how it's done. Riley took the rope, tied the knot, held it up with a look that said, "See?" Mason shook his head, but he was smiling. This was what healing looked like. Not big, dramatic moments. Not speeches or breakthroughs or sudden transformations. Just small things, ordinary things. A kid learning to be a kid again, one knot at a time. The community started to change too. Neighbors who used to cross the street when they saw the Iron Shepherds coming started stopping to say hello, started asking questions, started wanting to know how they could help. The hospital implemented a new protocol, a quick response flag for suspected abuse cases. Dr. Patterson made sure of it. No more letting kids slip through the cracks because the paperwork was slow or the staff was busy. When a flag went up, people moved. The bikers threw a small fundraiser to cover Riley's counseling sessions. Nothing fancy. Just a cookout in Bear's backyard with a donation jar by the grill. They raised enough to pay for 6 months of therapy. And then they kept going. Turned that jar into a fund. The Riley Fund, they called it, even though Riley said that was embarrassing. It was meant for future cases. Other kids who needed help that insurance wouldn't cover. Other families who were drowning and didn't know where to turn. The same people who had called them thugs 6 months earlier were now calling them heroes. The bikers didn't care about the label. They just kept showing up. And then Clint's lawyer filed a motion. It came out of nowhere. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe men like Clint always find a way to reach back into the lives they've damaged, to remind their victims that the nightmare isn't really over. He wanted visitation rights. That's what the motion said. He claimed the charges were exaggerated. He was seeking help. He was committed to being a better father. The words made Mason's blood boil, made Ivy punch a wall in her garage, made every single biker who'd been in that hospital want to ride down to the county jail and have a conversation that wouldn't end well. But that's not what they did. What they did was show up, again, the way they always did. Riley found out on a Tuesday. Her aunt tried to break it gently, but there's no gentle way to tell an 11-year-old that the man who broke her bones wants permission to see her again. The fear came back. All of it, like it had never left. She stopped sleeping, started flinching at car doors. The Thursday sailboat sessions went quiet. Riley would sit at the table, staring at the model, her hands still, her eyes somewhere else. Mason didn't push, didn't ask questions, just sat with her. Let the silence be what it was. What if they let him? Riley asked one afternoon. Her voice was small, the voice she'd used in the hospital that first night. They won't. But what if they do? Mason put down the rigging, looked at her. You remember what I told you that night? In the hospital? Riley nodded. I meant it. Every word. That man is not going to hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing. Not while any of us are breathing. He leaned forward. He leaned forward. You've got something now that you didn't have before. You've got proof. You've got people. You've got 20 men who will stand in that courtroom and tell the judge exactly what they saw. But what if the judge doesn't believe them? Then we find another way. And another way after that. However many ways it takes. Mason's voice was steady, certain. You're not alone anymore, Riley. I know it's hard to believe. I know you've been let down before. But this is different. We're different. And we're not going anywhere. Riley looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the rigging and went back to work on the sailboat. She didn't say anything else. But her hands were steadier than they'd been in days. The hearing happened on a Thursday. Mason offered to skip the sailboat session, but Riley asked him to come to the courthouse instead. I want you there, she said, when they tell him no. So he went. They all went. 20 bikers in their cleanest jeans and their most respectable shirts, filling the benches behind Riley like a wall of leather and loyalty. Riley didn't have to speak. That was the first thing the judge made clear. She didn't have to testify, didn't have to face Clint, didn't have to do anything but sit there and let the evidence speak for her. And the evidence spoke loud. Ivy's notes, Rex's documentation, the hospital records, the photographs, the x-rays, the pattern that stretched back 18 months, hidden in paperwork that said accident and fall and clumsy kid. The judge looked at all of it. looked at Clint's lawyer, who was trying to spin a story about rehabilitation and second chances, looked at Clint himself, who was wearing a suit and a tie and a face that was trying very hard to look sorry. Then the judge looked at Riley. "Young lady," she said, "you're very brave. I want you to know that." Riley didn't say anything, but she nodded. The verdict came down 10 minutes later. Full restraining order, no contact, no visitation, no phone calls, no letters, nothing. And the charges? Upgraded. Based on the pattern of abuse documented in those hospital records, based on the testimony of the nurses and doctors who'd finally connected the dots, based on everything Riley had been too scared to say for 2 years. Clint was going away. Not forever, but for a long time. Riley cried when she heard. Not from fear this time, not from pain, from relief. Stories like Riley's remind us why we do this. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that protection can come from unexpected places. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Because every view, every share, every comment helps us prove that the scariest looking people sometimes have the biggest hearts. 6 months after that night in the emergency room, Riley Morrow stood in front of 20 bikers and did something nobody expected. She gave them a gift. It wasn't wrapped, wasn't fancy, wasn't anything you could buy in a store. It was a tiny plastic horse, faded purple, one leg cracked and glued back together, the same horse she'd clutched in her pocket that night when everything changed. Violet. She'd been carrying it for 6 months, holding it when she was scared, sleeping with it under her pillow, rubbing her thumb across its cracked surface whenever she needed to remember that she'd survived. But now she was ready to let it go. She walked up to Mason. He was standing at the front of the room, looking uncomfortable the way he always did when people paid attention to him. He was better at doing things than being thanked for them. "This is for you," Riley said, and she reached up and pinned the little horse to his vest, right next to the iron shepherd's patch. Mason looked down at this tiny, ridiculous thing, a plastic horse from a cereal box, cracked and faded and held together with glue. His voice cracked. First time anyone had heard that happen. "What's this for?" Riley's voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been. "You wear the horse. I wear the sheriff badge." She pointed to her own jacket, a small pin on the collar, a tiny silver star the bikers had given her at the fundraiser. She'd worn it every day since. "You kept me safe," Riley said. "Now I'm giving you the thing that kept me safe before you showed up. So we both remember." Mason didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at that horse, at this kid who'd been so broken 6 months ago and was standing here now, giving away the only thing she'd managed to hold on to through all of it. Then he knelt down, put his hands on her shoulders, and spoke in a voice that was rough around the edges. "I'm gonna wear this every day. You understand? Every single day. And every time someone asks me what it is, I'm gonna tell them about a girl named Riley who taught 20 grown men what brave looks like." Riley smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Deal," she said. 1 year later, Riley was 12 now, living with her aunt in a house that smelled like coffee and clean laundry and nothing else. Her mother was getting help therapy twice a week, a support group on Saturdays. They talked on the phone sometimes. It was awkward and hard, and not what Riley had imagined, but it was honest, and that was more than they'd had before. School was better. She'd made friends, 2 girls named Jasmine and Keely, who didn't know anything about what had happened and just liked Riley because she was funny and kind and really good at drawing horses. She still walked with a limp. The cerebral palsy wasn't going anywhere, but now she walked like it was just part of who she was, not something to be ashamed of. Not something that made her weak, just Riley, moving through the world in her own way. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She'd decided that about 3 months after leaving the hospital. "Animals didn't lie," she said. "They didn't pretend to be nice when they weren't. You always knew where you stood with an animal. Plus, she could help them the way people had helped her." Mason still showed up every Thursday. 4 o'clock, same time. Same knock on the door. The first sailboat was finished. It sat on Riley's shelf, rigging perfect, Every knot tied exactly right. She'd done most of the work herself by the end. They were building a second one now, bigger, more complicated. Riley said she wanted to try something with real canvas sails this time. Mason said she was getting ambitious. She said someone had taught her that was allowed. He'd testified at 3 more custody hearings since Riley's case. Other kids, other monsters. The Iron Shepherds had become known for it now. The hospital had their number. So did 2 social workers and a family court judge who'd seen what 20 witnesses in leather could do for a scared kid's case. They didn't save every child. The world didn't work that way. Some kids fell through the cracks no matter how many people tried to catch them, but they saved the ones they could, and they kept showing up for the ones they couldn't save yet. The ripple went outward. The Riley Fund had helped 7 families by the end of that first year. Counseling, legal fees, emergency housing, whatever people needed to get from the worst night of their lives to something that looked like a future. The hospital's quick response protocol had flagged 12 cases. 8 of those kids were in safer situations now because someone had paid attention in time. Neighbors who used to lock their doors when the bikes rolled past now waved from their porches. Some of them had started volunteering. Others just brought food to the cookouts. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't a movie ending where everything was fixed and everyone lived happily ever after. It was just people, doing what they could, showing up when it mattered, refusing to look away. One 11-year-old girl, with a broken wrist, had walked into an emergency room and walked out with a family she never expected. And 20 men who thought they knew why they rode found a reason that mattered more than the road. They were scary until they weren't. That's what Riley told her therapist once, when asked about the bikers. It became kind of a motto after that, something the Iron Shepherds put on t-shirts for the fundraisers, something people repeated when they heard the story. Scary until they weren't. That's the thing about people, isn't it? We judge by what we see first. The leather, the tattoos, the scars, the engines that sound like thunder, and the faces that don't smile at strangers. We don't wait to see the hands that hold a child's drawing, the voices that say, "I believe you," when everyone else says, "Prove it." The boots that show up every Thursday at 4 o'clock because a promise was made and promises matter. We see the surface, we make our judgments, and we miss everything underneath. 20 black vests in the rain, boots on shiny hospital tile, and a tiny plastic horse, cracked and glued and perfect, pinned to leather next to a patch that says, Iron Shepherds. That's the image that stays. Not the horror of what happened before, not the fear or the pain or the years Riley spent learning that home was the most dangerous place she knew. The image that stays is the one that came after. The one where an 11-year-old girl with a limp and a broken wrist looked up at a room full of strangers and realized they weren't strangers anymore. They were family. Sometimes the safest place in the world is surrounded by people who look the least safe. And sometimes, a child who is taught that love is a weapon learns that it can also be a shield. Thank you for riding with us today. If you believe that the scariest-looking people sometimes have the biggest hearts, subscribe to Biker's Bite. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in that ER? And remember, the rumble you hear might not be trouble coming. It might be help on the way. Riley Morrow was 11 years old when she walked into that emergency room alone. She walked out surrounded, and she's never been alone since.